Okay, good afternoon. This is the final event of the Trinity Development Research Week. Thank you all for making it through. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience there. It's also a Trinity International Development Initiative, UCD Human Development Initiative seminar series. I see Paul here, so I have to say that. We are delighted to have Derek Fee with us today. Derek is the former head of Delegation for the European Commission in Zambia. He's had a varied career working in the private sector and in the public sector in a variety of capacities. He's worked for Shell Oil. He has worked for the Iranian National Oil Company. He's written several books on the oil and gas sector and European involvement in that. And he's author of a forthcoming book on managing an aid exit strategy. So obviously we're looking forward very much to hearing what Derek has to say. He says he'd like to stimulate a bit of debate and engagement afterwards, so if you can be thinking of questions that you'd like to ask Derek as he's talking. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Padraig, and thank you to Trinity for inviting me today to speak to you. I want to speak for about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes, and then get some feedback from you on the subject of my talk, which is the development aid business. It says in the brochure that I was also going to talk about my career as an international civil servant, and I might spare you that, and I might just add a few things in as I go along. But I want to start off with a little anecdote on that subject alone. This business of the career thing. Michael D. Higgins has just been inaugurated as the President of Ireland today, and most of you will have heard him speak over the last while. And Michael D. went, when he was a minister, on a trip to Africa, and he came back and he had to report to the Dáil on this trip. That's quite true. He had to report to the Dáil on this trip in Africa, and he was talking in the course of his report about he met this Whinwe and he met this other Whinwe, and he was meeting Whinwees all over the place. And this confused the Dáil reporter. And at the end of the speech, he went down and he said, "Minister, you were mentioning this Whinwe business all during your speech. Is this a tribe in Africa?" And the minister said, "No," he said. "You know those kind of people that you meet in Africa? When we were in Zambia, when we were in Zimbabwe, when we were in Kenya." So I don't want to burden you with where I was and what I did. I prefer to do what I came today to do, which is talk about the business end of development aid. And sometimes people don't look upon it as a business. They look upon it charity and a whole lot of other different things without thinking that there is actually a business model behind development aid. But it's a most unusual business model. It's not like any other business model that you've ever seen before in a normal business. And my first slide sort of tries to demonstrate that. And what does the slide say, really? That everybody who's in development aid talks about their motivation is to get out of development aid. And I, like many other people in the business, have stood up in front of people and said, the main purpose of our office here is to make ourselves redundant. Now, as I've got on the slide as well, yes, the end is nigh, but is it going to last for another 150 million years? Because development aid has been rambling on for the last 40 odd years. And everybody is talking about the motivation is to end it. So this is not like the normal business model. This is not the model of the Shell Oils or BP or IBM or any of those companies. It's the model that says we want to end this particular business. Now, these are two quotes I have, one from an eminent African and one from an eminent European politician. Now, you can read the quotes for yourself, but both of them say the same thing, basically, that this aid business is limited. It's something that people want to limit in time. They don't want to continue on with it, both from the African side and from the European side. Now, you could replace Thabo Mbeki's quote with a quote from Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, Kikwete from Tanzania, or Ian Kama from Botswana. The newer leaders in Africa, all of them would subscribe to what Thabo Mbeki says here. In terms of the Europeans, you could add the Swedish Minister for Development, Minister Carlson, would agree with what Angela Merkel says, as would a lot of other people. So you can see here that it's not only the people who are in the field who are talking about ending aid or being in a business which is supposed to be declining, it's also the political leaders who are talking about this kind of thing. So, those of you who are doing your MSc in aid are moving into a business where the amount of publication seems to be increasing exponentially every year. And if you look at them, I tried to make a few, a comparison here with the ones on the right, which are all about why aid doesn't work. There is probably no course on development aid at the moment where they don't ask you to read Dambisa Moyo's book, which I found very flawed, and which a lot of people in the profession found very flawed. I think it's a bit difficult to accept a lot of her argumentation when she has never actually worked in development aid herself. I mean, she was the economist, African economist for Goldman Sachs. So to have her, yes, it's important to read it. It's important to take in the ideas that are in it. But I think you should be ready to challenge everything that you see. Everybody, I think, should look at Bill Easterly's The White Man's Burden, which is a brilliant text in terms of economics, whether you want to talk about development aid or not. Just as an economic text, it's very good. And there's some other ones there which are very good. And I mentioned with Padraig earlier on, he mentioned to me, in fact, that he likes Glennie's book, The Trouble with Aid. And I like it a lot too. In 2009, the European Development Days, which I'm sure you've heard about, took place in Stockholm. And one of the speakers was Glennie. And he spoke about his book and what he felt about the trouble with aid, and that aid was a diminishing business, and you know, the same kind of thing I'm talking to you today about. And I was sitting beside the Director General for Development in the European Commission, Koos Richel. And at the end of Glennie's speech, there was a huge amount of clapping. People were standing up. They all thought it was a wonderful idea, yes. And Koos Richel turned around to me and he said, most of the people in this room make their living out of aid. And there they are, all clapping about this guy talking about the end of aid. He said, it's the best example of the turkeys voting for Christmas I've ever seen in my life. So there are issues around all of these books. Giles Bolton is very good, Aid and Other Business, and the Aid Trap I put in there as well. And on the other side, you've got the people who are saying that we've got to continue, that we've got to go on, we just changed the aid. Jeffrey Sachs, The End of Poverty. I mean, what a statement to make, the end of poverty. Today, and you can look up the figures yourself on the net, 44.6 million Americans are on food stamps. In the richest country in the world, 44.6 million Americans are on food stamps. And he's talking about the end of poverty. It's a bit naive to talk about the end of poverty, how we can make it happen in our generation. It's not going to happen. There'll always be poverty, and it'll always be around at some level or other. So, I mean, you have to yourselves make some comparisons between what's happening in these books on the right-hand side and what's happening in the ones on the left-hand side, which are saying that Muhammad Yunus says that microfinance will work, whereas there's a very nice book out which says, why doesn't microfinance work? So you got to read between the two and see what you think and what you can make up from those two sets of approaches. And I'm quite sure there'll be a lot more books out. Bill Easterly has one out just now, which is getting better. I'm not so sure he's right, but there you go. Okay, so in this declining business, everybody is talking. Thabo Mbeki is saying, we don't want any more aid. Paul Kagame is saying, we don't want any more aid. Angela Merkel is saying we should stop aid, and Minister Carlson is saying the same thing. But what's happening? Well, official development aid, and I'm not going to go into the definition, you probably know. The official development aid is that which is measured by the Development Aid Committee of the OECD. So official development aid has been going up since 2002, and aid to Africa consequently has been going up as well. And I well remember in 2005, and this links to this business about speaking about my career as an international civil servant. In 2005, after the Glen Eagle summit, I was sitting with a group of my colleagues, and they were saying, "Are these guys for real?" At the summit, that they were talking about doubling of aid. We had in Nairobi in 2005, in our European Union delegation, which was covering Kenya and Somalia, we had 145 people. Dispersing aid is a resource-intensive business. You cannot double your aid without doubling your resources. It uses up a lot of people's time. Whether it's programmed development aid or whether it's budget support development aid, people think budget support doesn't use up resources. It uses up an amazing amount of resources. I can tell you that. So when you're talking about doubling aid, when you see this, and it actually does double between 2002 and 2009. When you talk about doubling aid, you're talking about doubling up on resources as well. And in an atmosphere where people are talking about development aid ending, it seems incongruous that aid is increasing at such a level. So the aid business itself, the ODA budget was about 140 billion in 2010. Now that's the ODA, the official development aid. If you take in all of the rest of the development aid, and that's a very nefarious figure, it's very, very hard to put your finger on it and say, add in John O'Shea and Gold and a couple of other people. But it could go to 280 billion. It could actually double that figure. There are more than 100,000 people employed, not just the people who are in the conference in Stockholm. There are around the world 100,000 people employed. The World Bank alone has 10,000 employees. Think of it. The World Bank has 10,000 employees all doing development aid, or knowledge work, as they say themselves. If aid were a business, it would rank as 19th in the world by turnover, on a par with Allianz, the major insurance company. If we take the 280 billion figure, if we double that figure, then it ranks with the very biggest of the oil companies, the Shells, the Exxons, the BPs. And in terms of the current employees, and it's a hard number to come, it's a really hard number to come down on how many people are employed in aid. But if we take the 100,000 as being an average figure, aid would employ the same number of people as GlaxoSmithKline. So it's not a small business by any stretch of the imagination. And that's why I want to look at it a little bit as from the business side of things, rather than just this and I'm not talking about humanitarian aid here, in case anybody's mixing up between development aid and humanitarian aid, totally different thing. This is development aid. So who are the major ODA donors? You know them all. And what do we say? There are a lot of them. Now, if you're talking about a business model, and I don't know whether any of you have been to business school, but if you're talking about a business model, you have to ask yourself, when you look at all these people, what is the difference? What differentiates Irish Aid, for instance, from KfW, the German aid bank? What do they do differently? Now, you'd have to go through each one of their annual reports and try and find out. It's not like a business where you can, it's much, much easier to differentiate, because if you go and if you look at projects throughout the world, you will find a road which is being financed by the African Development Bank, the European Commission, the European Investment Bank, and KfW. So what are they doing? They're all just putting money in. They are a source of funds. So why isn't there just one source of funds? Why do we have all of these different people, DFID, ourselves in the European Commission and so on? Why do we have all of these people in this business who are doing the same thing? What do they offer? This is my whole point. What is the difference in the offer that these people have? If there's no difference, then what are we doing? And in effect, in the field, if you go in and I take an example from my own past, well, not an example, it's a hypothetical example. You go into the Minister of Roads in Zambia and he says, I want you to build a road between X and Y. And you say, well, I don't think there's a very good reason for doing that. You know, we've checked it out and we don't come up with the figures. He'll say to you, okay, then fine, I'll go to the African Development Bank or I'll go to KfW. And that's what they're offering. They're all offering the same thing. And also, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, you can imagine with everybody being involved, it's a mess trying to coordinate aid. I attended an initiative in Zambia one time, the International Health Initiative, where Zambia was signing on to that. And one of my staff said to me, well, you really should go to this. We're the biggest supporter of health in Zambia. And he said there won't be very many people there because there's only about 4 different agencies that are helping out in the health sector. And I said, yeah, sure, okay, fine. And I went along, and the room was absolutely jam-packed. And I could not believe it, that there were so many people in this room. And they were from the Clinton Foundation, the Gates Foundation, Global Fund, Gavi, all of these. And I asked the guy to make up this slide for me. I said, put everybody on the slide who's involved in the health sector. This is what he came up with. Now, can you imagine? That's why I say at the top of it, try managing this. If you've got so many people who are all trying to do their good thing all together, and you put that on top of the guys who are in the ODA, who are all trying to do pretty much the same thing anyway, and you've got this huge group of people all trying to supply aid. And that's where I'm coming from now, that in a business model you have supply and demand. And now I'm just talking about the supply side. And that was the supply of ODA was earlier on. This is now the supply in the health sector on top of what we get in the ODA. So you can see it's quite complicated. This is Kenya, and you just have to look at it. Please don't go through it because you'll only go crazy. This is the procurement chain of donors in health in Kenya in 2006. Now, just try and follow along. In the middle here, you'll see the source of funds, USAID, KfW, EU, UNEFA, DFID, and so on, all over the place. Ministries all over the place. Hundreds of meetings all between ministry officials and all of these people who are involved here. And these are only the major ones. You have a whole load of other people who are supplying as well. So this is just a total and complete mess. There has to be some way of streamlining it. It hasn't happened yet. And you find that if you have something as complicated as this, the other problem that rises is corruption. Because if it's so complicated that you can't follow it, then this opens the door to people to fiddle with the funding. And really, this is the point about streamlining. You've got to streamline the whole thing. You have to get rid of this in such a way that you can follow the trail of the money. Not only the money, aid money, but aid money is not important. There's a lot of the Kenyan people's money in there as well. So it's not just about the assistance, it's also about the local money as well. So that's that. So this is what can happen. You're trying to save the patient, and you have all these people with their money supply of blood, and they're all choking each other's supply off, with the result that the patient actually doesn't get better. And we have the situation for the last 40 years, we just continue to go ahead with aid again and again and again. And people like, I met the Swedish Minister Carlson in Zambia in 2010, and she said, you know, we got to stop this. There has to be some way to stop it. But of course, the problem is, how do we stop it? This is, again, you don't have to follow this one either. I'm sure the presentation will be available to anybody who wants it. Yeah, so you can have a look at it to put yourself asleep at night. Perhaps you can follow some of these things along. But what it says basically is that you have some bilateral and some multilateral assistance in all of these areas, and the areas are all along the top, and you've got all these people who are doing all of this kind of stuff. And then you add it all up, and you can see that the Ethiopians probably spend months just dealing with these agencies which are on the left-hand side. And everybody knows the story that the Tanzanians close consultations for 3 months every year so that they can actually get a bit of work done. We had a budget support group in Zambia, and just before I left at the end of 2010, we had a meeting with the Zambian government on our budget support. And I counted, it was a rather boring meeting. I counted the number of people in the room. On the budget support side, we had 21 people ranging from ambassadors, heads of aid agencies, down to specialists on our side, and there were 25 ministry people on the other side. It was an exchange of information meeting which lasted 2 hours, which engaged 45 people for 2 hours. That was 90 man-hours. There was no decisions taken at the meeting, and all we did was we could have been done on paper. Somebody could have just sent around, this is the situation on paper, and we could have all got some work done. And that's what happens here. We've got all of this stuff all mixed up. Now, that was the supply side of aid. Where is the demand for aid? Well, I'm sure some of you have seen this because it's taken off the net. The very dark colours are the ones that don't need too much aid, and the very light colours are the ones that do need aid. And you can see that according to this particular one, it's mainly sub-Saharan Africa. So aid is, and obviously some parts of Asia, but it's mainly sub-Saharan Africa. So this is where the demand for aid is coming from. So we have all these suppliers who are disengaging as countries come on stream. You've probably seen in the last year the Danes have cut their number of target countries by 50%, and so have the Swedes. So there's a concentration now on where the demand is coming from. And that's the demand is coming from sub-Saharan Africa, as you can see there, and a little bit from Asia, and a lot from the Pacific, but it's so small that you don't even worry about it. The Pacific Islands, it doesn't even rate. When I look at the figures for the African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries of the EU, when you look at the breakdown between the three of them, the Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific, the Pacific doesn't even rate. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Is there anybody in the room who hasn't read Lions on the Move? You haven't read. What is going on? This is a report. Go on the net now and take it down. Our good colleagues in what do they call it now? The Irish, not Ireland Aid, the other one for industry. What is it? Not the IDA, the other one. Enterprise Ireland. Got it. Enterprise Ireland held an event about a month ago, and they brought over. This is a report by McKinsey. They brought over McKinsey, who did a big presentation on this, and it really is worth reading. It's one of the best analysis of the situation in Africa. But you can see that this is Africa today, where there's 1.6 trillion is the GDP, which is only the equivalent of Brazil and Russia. But what's even more interesting, and I'm going to flip along to it because I want you to read the report. It's really good. Is what can happen by the year 2020. And there you have that the GDP could be 2.6 trillion, the 1.4 trillion will be consumer spending. So there's a lot of potential in Africa for business. 1.1 billion is the number of Africans of working age. And that a lot of Africans will be living in cities. And we all know that when people are living in cities, there's a lot more economic activity. So there is a lot of potential in Africa, and there's a lot of potential in Africa for business, rather than for just the aid business. There's a lot of potential for real business. And a figure which doesn't appear here, because I've just taken this out of the report, a figure that doesn't show here, is that the potential for agriculture in Africa is $800 billion a year. If Africa's agricultural potential was developed, there would be $800 billion. And if you follow Glennie's arguments in his book, you'll see that he says that aid is good business for the West, because if we were to give up in the Doha development round, make some concessions to Africa, it would actually swamp the development aid budget. So give them development aid, don't make concessions in Doha, is part of the thing. Okay, I want to speed along. How am I doing? Good, I'll speed along. Sometimes people know there's something wrong, and they think, well, we have to do something about it. And we've had 3 big conferences in the last 10 years or 8 or 9 years. First one was in Monterey, and the result of it was the Monterey Consensus on Financing for Development. And so we know there's something wrong. What is it? Now this comes back to the Jeffrey Sachs School of Economics, which says there's something wrong, throw lots of money at it. And the more money we throw at it, the better it'll get. Well, that may be a little naive. That may not be the case, but you can shout back at me later on. In Monterey, everybody who was there said we will give 0.7% of the GNI in aid. That was the result of the Monterey conference. So now something is wrong, we need money, and everybody pledges money. But after a little while, people realized it wasn't just money. And we had the second biggest conference, which was this conference in Paris on aid effectiveness. Because we said everybody is falling all over each other. We've got to do something about it. I can remember even in Russia in the early 1990s when Glasnost came about, and we in the European Commission got interested. We went in one day to make a presentation to the Russians on how we would restructure their electricity sector, because we wanted to pitch to give them money to do a feasibility study on it. Imagine we were pitching to give them money to do a feasibility study. They didn't pitch to us; we pitched to them. So we were waiting in the outer office for the ministers to be free, and what happened? The World Bank guys came out. They'd been pitching for exactly the same job. So that's why we get this sort of problem coming up. So in Paris, the Paris aid efficiency was supposed to change all that. We were all supposed to get have this. We would operate in one sector, and the CEDA would operate in another sector, and so on and so on and so on. But people don't really like to get involved in those kind of things. They want to have their own. They have emotional attachments to a sector, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's women's issues or whatever it is. So it takes a lot of time to work out who will operate in what sector. So that was the second one. Was, of course, here we had all these lovely buzzwords: ownership, alignment, harmonization. It's great. You go to these conferences and everybody works out what other buzzword can we use, to make this conference different from the last one. And that was followed up by the third high-level forum on energy effectiveness or aid effectiveness, and that was in Accra. And we only had one difference in this, was the end one, which I put in green in blue. I don't know if you see it in blue. Capacity development to build the ability of countries to manage their own future, which they said lies at the centre of the Accra, the conference. The result of the conference was to help Africans to manage their own, or not just Africans but other developing nations. Okay, another one I want to just mention very quickly is, if you haven't got this report, which is done by Ernst & Young. It's called "It's Time for Africa," and it's about the other. The core of Dan Beese's book is that the markets will supply some money, and foreign direct investment will be the rest. She even says in her book that FDI alone won't make it. But this is a study which is about FDI in Africa. You can see that Africa's share of global FDI projects, 4.5% in 2010. This is in an area where you have most of the emerging economies. 4.5% of the global FDI projects in 2010 took place in Africa. And it really is very small. But then we have to ask ourselves, what are the reasons why? These are the barriers that Ernst & Young have developed for investing in Africa. And you can see the biggest one is the unstable political environment. And that is a major issue everywhere. It's like, it has been very aggravating for the European Union to deal with Zimbabwe. Why? Because Robert Mugabe and the regime keeps on saying, you have got economic sanctions against Zimbabwe. There are no economic sanctions against Zimbabwe. None. There are sanctions against members of the regime travelling, but there is no economic sanction against Zimbabwe. But would you invest in a country where they can expropriate your investment tomorrow? No, you won't. You cannot get people to invest somewhere where the political instability is such that they can't even develop a risk profile for it. So they can't say, we need to get our money back in X years. And that's what happens in a lot of cases. Mining companies want their money back yesterday when they go into a development, because they're so unsure that the rules of the game are going to be maintained. Okay, I want to now just finish off with 3 things that I feel about development aid. And this is really an area where you can challenge me. But the first one is mission creep. We began development aid 40 years ago, and it was about helping countries economically. It was based a little bit loosely on the Marshall Plan at the end of World War II. So it was about helping countries economically. As you go along, you find, and it happened for me, the tipping point for me was the Live Aid in 1985, where the focus started to change from helping economically to this war on poverty. Everything was about alleviating poverty. Everybody's talking about poverty. Suddenly we weren't talking about economics anymore, we were talking about poverty. And everything we did was about poverty. And now, if you look at what's happening lately, and especially some of the pronouncements by Secretary of State Clinton, we have moved on from the war on poverty. And now we're talking about development aid as part of the war on terror. So we've gone from economics to poverty to the war on terror, and I don't know where we're going to go next. But what's happening is that the shifting emphasis is no good. We can't have mission creep. We must have a mission, a defined mission, and we must go for it and not have this element of mission creep in there. The second one is somewhat tied into mission creep, is having an exit strategy. Now, I have been involved in the course of my career in what we call country strategy papers. And if you don't know what a country strategy paper is, go to any delegation of the European Commission's website and you'll see the country strategy paper for whatever country it is. We have one for Zimbabwe, Zambia. For every country that we operate in, there's a country strategy paper. And I've worked on a lot of them. And we've got a section on politics, we've got a section on economics, we've got a section on the social sectors, the health sector, the education sector, and all of these kind of things. It's a real report on what's the state of the country at that time. And then added to it is our program for the next 5 years. But nobody ever in my time mentioned, how do we get out of this? It was always about how do we get in, but it was never about what is the result of this initiative that we're going to undertake, which will satisfy us that we can get out. And it's pretty much the same, if you think of the logic of it, of what's happened in Afghanistan and Iraq. If you've had mission creep, and you have a lack of exit strategy as well. Because if the mission was to get rid of Saddam Hussein has been gone for a long time. So that mission is over. If the mission is now to set up a stable Iraq, that's the next mission. And I don't know what the next mission after that is going to be. But I'm quite sure it'll creep along a little bit. But this idea of going in without knowing how do you get out is structurally wrong. And I say structurally wrong, but I mean I was part of the process myself. And I never questioned, I never said, let's add an exit strategy here, because people would have said, what? Let's get rid of that guy, he's the only one who's mentioning this thing. So, there is that aspect to it. And the last one is, and I hate this, I'm sorry that I have a slide with a white hand and a black hand, but it's a fact. There is a symbiotic relationship between the donors and the recipients. They both need each other. They both need each other. If a country says we don't want you, that's disaster for an aid agency. If you go, you look at our friends in the World Bank. They hold 2 meetings a year: the spring meeting and the autumn meeting. The World Bank and the IMF. I have sat down with ministers and they've told me how much they love those meetings, because it gives them a chance to mingle with the good and the great, or the great and the good, and also to claim $750 a day in expenses. So there is this relationship between the donors on the one side and the recipients on the other. And we've got to break that relationship. That relationship must go. So those three aspects for me, and I'm saying this like, I think the model is broken. And I think we knew it when they went to Monterrey, and they knew it in Paris, and they knew it in Accra. But that's why I think the model is broken, but other people have different ideas on that. So that's pretty much what I think, and some of it is in there. It'll be in that book, which will be out next year, sometime. It's not up to me when it's going to be out. It's not just that's in it. There's some other things in there as well, about trade liberalization, about regional integration, about microfinance, about the aid industry as it is, and what part it plays. So that's where it is. I'll answer any questions on what I've just said, or even I'll answer any questions on EU development policy if somebody has an argument about it. And those questions I don't get to answer, there's my email, and you can send me, and I promise I'll answer. Okay? So if you have a question, I will answer at some stage, but I will answer, okay? So thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Derek. That was great. Very informative and provocative. Just on the Zimbabwe government's communication strategy, I don't know whether people may have read in the paper this morning, Robert Mugabe has released a pop song, it's 827, but this is part of the new strategy apparently. Just to make you aware that this session is being podcast, so please, we have a roving mic, so can you use that before asking your question. If you can just briefly identify yourself, we'll gather a few questions together and then we'll let Derek respond to those.
There has to be a brave individual somewhere.
There is, yeah. Mac in the front.
Thank you. I'm Mac McLaughlin from the Centre for Global Health here in Trinity. Thank you. That was very interesting and provocative. When you were describing the sort of the mess of things, it also made me think about one of your European Commission colleagues who did a paper on why do NGOs exist, with the idea that they exist because, in a sense, the donors and the recipients don't have a trusting relationship, so they are a go-between. So in terms of what you've been describing, I suppose the question is, why do aid programs exist, and what will replace them? And I know that you're hinting towards the market in various ways. I suppose one of my concerns would be that the things that make people poor are often not things that are not done. They are things that are deliberately done in terms of international trade and so on and so forth. So could you say a little bit more about what you've got, the exit strategy, what comes in place, how do countries, I think as Zach said, sort of pick themselves up by their bootlaces?
So, is there another question? We gather a few questions, or yeah.
Hi, my name is Linda Friel. I work with Oxfam. Probably similar to Mac, I wanted to know more about any practical solutions that you have, and also what's your personal contribution then to solve all this? I mean, so far I seem to be part of the system, part of the problem.
Yeah, well,
this is very brave now, I know.
No.
Did you ask for a brave?
Of course, and these are the questions that must be asked, and I think my colleagues and myself want people to ask these kind of questions. First of all, in that book that I've got there, I have the second section. I've entitled "The Search for a Magic Bullet." And you see, this is what we've been at all these years. We've been looking for a magic bullet. Microfinance was to be the magic bullet. The Pierre Omidyar, who is a very clever guy and owns a big company in the US, says that we should stop everything and just do microfinance. That's not the answer. The market's not the answer. FDI is not the answer. The answer is a whole range of issues. Now, one of the things that struck me we have a history in the European Union and of the Social Fund and the Regional Fund. And sometimes we haven't used that experience in our aid. Now, the World Bank don't have that kind of experience. We have. And yet, because we're segmented into Director Generals, the Director General for the Social Fund is in one, Director General for the Regional Fund is another, and aid is in another. And we don't tend to have a sort of a good cross-fertilisation. If you've worked in one of them, yes, you do. Now you take, for instance, the kind of funds that we used in Ireland, just as an example. These were self-help aid. You had to contribute yourself. You had to be part of the process. And I think that's, when we talk about ownership in terms of the Paris Agenda or Accra, ownership means in a lot of cases money. But it certainly means money and resources in most cases. And the unfortunate thing about aid is, and we all know the problem. For many years we went in, we built a road and we left. And you come back 10 years later and there's no road. And that's the problem. It has to be owned. And I spent 4 years in Zambia. One of the people I met when I went there first was the president, was Manawasa. And whenever he made a speech at the opening of whatever that we had, whether it was a market or a road or whatever, he always said, "This is yours. This belongs to the people. We have to maintain it. We have to maintain it." And that's part of the thing as well. It has to be, part of it has to be self-aid, self-help. But the one, if you want to know one thing, there's only one thing that counts in aid: good governance. Every country that has exited from aid has had good governance. And that is the number one thing, in my view, that we should be concentrating on. We should concentrate all our aid on making government work. But that's not a magic bullet either. But that's one of the things we should do. So there's self-help aid, there is this business of good governance. And I think one of the things that has been proven to really, really work in aid, for me, has been the Global Fund and Gavi. And if you're talking about the health sector, Global Fund and Gavi have really, really worked. And I think we should build on that model. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't have a Global Fund for infrastructure, a Global Fund for education, a Global Fund, and then it gets rid of all this mess. Let's put the money into central pocket and let's operate from that. Much easier for everybody, much more along the model of the Marshall Plan. Have light organisation. There's a, I mean, let's we're time limited here. Where we could go on here, we could talk all day about these issues, and conferences are going on talking about these issues as we speak here. But these are the core issues. Yes, we must. The model is broken. That's definite. Otherwise, you wouldn't have all these people writing about how far the model. The model is broken, and we need to do something about it. I just want to say one thing about NGOs, and since you're Tony from Oxfam is here as well. The NGOs are schizophrenic. Let me explain why. They have real beliefs, a real motivation, a real belief, but they're acting as agents for people like us, like the Commission, like the World Bank. And it's not a question of trust. It's a question of bodies on the ground. And I'll give you an example. In Zambia, we had a major water program. We didn't have any water engineer in the delegation. We didn't have an expert. We didn't have a guy who could do this. So what did we do? Save the Children did most of our water projects in southern Zambia. Now, I think Save the Children are wonderful. I really like them. But is that their function? They have a higher level function. They have a real function. And then they're acting as an agent. They're acting the same as if we had a company who could do this for us, we would give it to the company. And that's why I say they're schizophrenic.
Right, should we take another few questions? Chris?
Hi, Chris Murphy in the Massive Development Programme, Year 2. Just when you talk about governments and state bodies, World Bank and people like that, when we look at the condition of, say, Greece at the moment, Spain, Portugal, perhaps Ireland as well, how much influence do states actually have themselves, governments actually have, on financial issues anymore? And when we look at the developing world, how can we tell the third world how they should spend our money and what they should do when our own states, our own governments themselves are not in control?
Thanks for that. And we take another one just behind you there.
Thank you very much. I'm Andrea, and I've been working in Kenya, and now I'm researching here. I have this question. You mentioned this mass of many donors, and you ask everyone what is the difference between the different actors. But I would like, for me, is that they are part of the foreign policy of every country. And therefore, as long as we have different national foreign policies, we will have this wide array of agency. Aid is integral part of foreign policies. In Italy, this is clear in the law. The law says development cooperation is part of foreign policies. In other countries, it's more subtle, and they pretend that these are independent bodies, but they aren't. in Afghanistan, in the military strategies of the US in Afghanistan and Iraq, development aid is part of the military strategies. So that would be my explanation. So I think it's normal that there are this mass of actors.
Okay, thanks. And we'll take one last question from Brona in the back there.
Thanks, and thanks, Derek. Brona Carr from Irish Aid. I think you put out a very persuasive case around the challenges that are being faced in aid, and that to some extent that this exercise or this project is broken. But of course, I think that is well recognised, that it is very complex and that it is very challenging, and the efforts to fix what perhaps are unfixable situations, but the efforts to fix that are ongoing. And as well as Paris and Monterey and Accra, we are now facing into the fourth conference in Busan coming up at the beginning of December in South Korea to look again. And again, we will have new language around how to do it better. And to some extent, I think that has to be welcomed, because it's not going to go away. There isn't perhaps another model. But the question, I suppose, Derek, for you is, within that, where do you see the European partners in particular coalescing around that international agenda when they themselves are under so much pressure, and particularly pressure of coordination at the current time? Thanks.
Yeah, I'll take the questions in the order they were asked. One of the things that you have to remember about development aid is it's not about what we want to do, it's about what they want to do. And when we conceived the country strategy paper, I glossed over the process, but the process is very much involved with the stakeholders, the national stakeholders, and the government, and nothing comes out that isn't approved by the governments. And the time of telling people what to do with our money is finished. That doesn't exist anymore. I think the challenge for them is to get their resources together properly, to have the resources which are coming from the aid side, to have the resources which are coming from the IMF, to have the resources that are coming from the African Development Bank, and to look at the resources and then to decide on how best to use them. In some countries behave brilliantly, and then it goes back to this question of governance. And it's a well-known fact that in the 1965, South Korea had a lower GNI per capita than Ghana. And look at the difference between the two of them today. If you go to any one of those countries that have exited, you find the one factor which they all have in common is a change in the concept of governance. So I think that's important. It's not so much we don't tell anybody what to do anymore. It's finished, done for. They get the money themselves, and they consider it to be their own money. Once we make that commitment, once we sign on those country strategy papers, that's their money. It's not our money anymore. I think the question on the yes, of course, aid has always been a part of foreign policy. That's where we came from. That's why it's important that we get back to issues like the Marshall Plan was about improving the economy. Improve the economy to bring it up to a level. We shouldn't be playing this game among ourselves. We shouldn't. I mean, I've just said that the model is broken. It shouldn't be that we go and we pitch to countries that I want to do your road. No, I want to do your road. No, I want to do your road. You know, I mean that's because we insist on having a big panel up on the road with a European flag on it. If the Finns were doing it, it would be a blue and white flag. If the Danes were doing it, it would be a red and white flag. And you know, this type of competition, what's it about? We shouldn't be competing with each other. It shouldn't be, and it should, of course, aid will always be connected to, and you find, okay, for instance, the British have a system where aid is segregated. DFID is separate from the embassy. The ambassador is not the number one aid person. The head of DFID is the number one aid person. So there is a little bit of a break in the UK. I personally was in our foreign relations DG in Brussels, and most of my staff were in the development DG. You know, so I mean, you have this sort of problem between aid and politics. Yes, you're right, but is it? But what you said is correct. But is it right that it should be like that? I don't think so. I think we should be concentrating on if it's about assisting a country, it shouldn't be just about the political aspect of it. We should be doing it to get that country up, to get it as part of the global system. And that brings that ties in with Rona's question as well. Rona's question is which is yes, there is even difficulty at the European level. I mean, it's terrible. We have a monthly meeting of the European group, which is led by now as you probably know, the European Commission is now the EU, the centre of the EU policy. Lady Ashton is the commissioner involved, and we have this meeting every month where we talk about the political situation and the aid situation and how we should be coordinating, and that's why I said this whole mess that we've got ourselves into with Barras and Accra is just sapping resources, because we have so many meetings we're together, and it's meetings, and sometimes there's meetings, like I said about the meeting we had in Zambia, 2 hours, 99 hours, and no decision, and no meeting should take place if there isn't going to be a decision, and this is the big problem. So I'm only outlining problems. If I had the solution, I guarantee you I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be earning €5,000 a day, giving people the answer. But the answer is not a simple one. And our people will go to South Korea in a few weeks' time, and they will spend many hours talking and coming up with new ideas. And unless you're willing to rethink the model, like we had a period in the 1990s where everybody was talking about re-engineering. If you're not willing to rethink it, if you're not willing to re-engineer it, then we just keep on going, and then we wait for the next mission.
Okay, I'm afraid we're out of time, but this is the last event in the Trinity Development Research Week. Thank you all very much for your input and attendance. Just to particularly thank Sarah Glavy, Sarah Doyle and Noni for organising, I think, over 20 events during the week, so if we can have a round of applause for them, please. And also to thank our speaker, Derek Fee, for today. Lots of food for thought. Thank you.